KPPP LP 88.1 FM radio presents a radio podcast. On the air and live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. A Mexican Crossing Lines, January 6, 2022. Remembering the Insurrection. Watch, listen, and learn.
Welcome, everybody, to Mexican Crossing Lines with your host, Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
You're listening to 88.1 FM, KPPP LP, Fargo-Moorhead, where we are adding local color to your airwaves. And we are broadcasting right now in the Fargo-Moorhead metro region. If you want to call and leave us a message about our programming or any show ideas or topics, you can call us at 701-566-0917. That allows you to leave a message of about 3 minutes long, and we might play it on the air. You can also contact us on Twitter by going to @media_PPP. You can email me at cindy@kpppfm.com or duke@kpppfm.com. And of course, I suggest people follow us all over social media, right, Duke?
That's right. You can follow us at 88.1 Fargo-Moorhead on Facebook, the People's Press Project, and Mexi-Can. You can also follow Cindy on a public page on Facebook by searching at Cindy Gomez-Schempp. Thank you for joining us. We're doing an audio podcast radio show. It's a little bit more on a podcast because we air it on the radio. And we haven't done shows for quite a while, but we're back in the saddle again.
And Happy New Year to everybody. The last couple of years, it feel like a never-ending sadness.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we're in this pandemic for year 3, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm sick of it. I'm angry. I'm depressed that this has been going on for so long.
Yeah, and we owe it to people that aren't taking precautions, people that don't wear masks, people that don't social distance. It's horrible in this community. The numbers are going up, and people aren't taking precautions, and that makes me the most angry because I'm being responsible, and I'm going to continue to be responsible because I want to protect myself and my family. I do not want COVID. I've had the boosters. I'm looking at a second booster this March. Hopefully the FDA will approve that, and we can continue to be protected from this dangerous disease.
Well, I want to talk more about COVID and how it's affecting every aspect of our life. We'll be doing that further ahead in the program. But I do want to ask that we discuss the day, the importance of this day. Today is January 6th, and it is the anniversary of the insurrection, the coup against our democracy. Normally, we would be celebrating Martin Luther King Day today, but unfortunately, for some reason, we can't do that. Well, it's because of the insurrection. I don't know if you heard about this, but Martin Luther King Jr.'s son said they will not be holding a celebration because of the importance of the day.
Yeah.
And if you think about how disastrous that day was, it's also doubly hurtful that it happened on Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Well, I heard them talking about on the United States put it on the calendar for, the 20th for it being a national holiday. And they have said that they're going to boycott that if there's nothing done with the voters' rights bills, because they said, why are we doing this? So we have still another 2 weeks to actually get something done in Congress.
Yeah, and it's ironic that here we are debating about the Martin Luther King holiday and whether or not they should celebrate it, given the fact that our voting rights, especially for people of color, have been essentially eroded away to the point where, by hook or crook, the Republicans are intent on stealing the next election. They tried to do it by a coup on January 6th, 1 year ago this day. It failed but just barely. We just barely managed to hold on to our democracy. And in the interim, the powers behind Stop the Steal, Turning Point USA, many other MAGA and Trump allied groups, PACs, organizations, grassroots, whatever, the mama militias and the this and the that, go into the school board meetings and attacking people at county commission meetings, at at city council meetings, because of mask mandates, because of vaccine requirements, because of critical race theories that aren't being taught in schools. This madness and the changing of the people that are in charge of elections at the state level, to the point where they're taking states where they have completely bipartisan groups that are overseeing the elections and making them partisan, making them Republican, so that they don't have a neutral, objective body that is reviewing our elections at the state level anymore. These things are very concerning in the midst of remembering what has transpired since the insurrection took place. I think that it bears remembering that what has happened is a slow rolling and continuing coup at the state level now, because they weren't able to do it with the SCOTUS. They weren't able to do it with Vice President Pence. They weren't able to do it with 100 members of Congress behind them, as we've now learned because of Peter Navarro spilling the beans and telling us that they had it all planned out with these 100 Congress members, that they were going to appeal to the vice president to get him to not certify the electors and to send it back to the state legislatures, and that they would send a new slate of electors for which there is no constitutional provision.
Yeah, it's all fictitious. He's talking about the Green Bay sweep, using some football terminology. I watched the beat last night and the night before and saw his interview
with Ari Melber.
With Ari, yes, and it's total fabrication of any truths. And he wrote a book. He's out there promoting his book of lies.
They've all got books. Mark Meadows has books. They didn't bother to tell us at the time that the president was spreading COVID to hundreds of people, and he had a positive test before he went to the debates with Biden and possibly attempted to murder the next president. But you know what? Let's save it for the book deal. All these people were aware of insurrection, were aware of the planning, were aware of the threat to our democracy, and they sat silent and said nothing.
Yep.
One of those people who has been coordinating with the president, former president, and who is now in some hot water himself is Mike Lindell, because he's now been subpoenaed to the 1-6 committee. And he is fighting it, of course, as almost all Trump allies have.
Yeah, he's pretty delusional, though, Mr. Pillow. He's been peddling these lies. He's being sued by Dominion. And, along with the other people who think they have this sort of privilege because they're associated with Trump, all those are being lost in the courts also.
Oh, yeah, he's going to definitely lose this lawsuit. He claims that his free speech rights and his religious rights, I don't know how that got in there, his religious rights are somehow being
abridged.
It's a clown show to me. Every single one of these 60-some lawsuits that we saw that Trump and his Mickey Mouse lawyers put forward, and I'm a paralegal. I have the utmost respect for the law, but there is no way to describe the lawsuits other than Mickey Mouse, because they were so pathetic. I've never seen such a basic failure of just even spelling things correctly.
That's right.
I'd never seen anything so,
Yeah, and Navarro talked about, Ari talked about how they never went to court, and he's like, well, they didn't have the merit.
They lacked even the basic merit.
The basic merit to end up in court. And he said, but the facts were never reviewed. And it's like, well, you write a sloppy lawsuit.
If you can't meet muster, like if you don't know where to file the lawsuit in the first place, which is one of the problems they had, if you don't have standing, meaning you're not an injured party, so you can't claim to sue someone, if you don't have the basic information like who are you suing and what remedies you seek, if you can't even fill in all of the blanks of how to file an initial pleading of complaint, which a lot of these did not do.
Yep.
They failed to do even those most basic things that a first-year law student would know how to do. And this man is arguing on television that somehow it's unfair that those cases weren't reviewed more thoroughly. If you can't even get to the front steps of the courthouse because you're too stupid to figure out how to file a pleading, you don't deserve to be heard by the court. That's how they whittle, away all of these frivolous lawsuits. They get rid of them by making sure that you have to follow procedure. And they didn't meet the requirements. For their part, the two lone Republicans, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, that have persisted in their defense of the Select Committee and the investigation of what happened on this day, on 1/6, a year ago. I think that Liz Cheney has been doubling down and or at the very least staying firm. Today, her dad was seen with her on Capitol Hill. And one of the statements that she made recently, which was very powerful, she's been making very powerful public statements in the mainstream media about Trump and what he did on January 6th. But what she said recently goes more to the heart of the party, of Republicans' duties, of what they need to reckon with. And she said this: remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I will not participate in that. I won't sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine our democracy. Very, very strong words.
Definitely. She's been very committed to holding people accountable. She's very, very consistent with her message. I'm really happy she's doing it that way. A lot of people are very nervous about even aligning with her because of her very conservative politics, but she's doing the right thing here.
I think so too. I've been very disappointed with the Democratic response. I don't think it's been strong enough and swift enough. And I realize, of course, maybe better than most people, how slowly the wheels of justice turn and how meticulous the investigations have to be in order for you to be able to make the charges stick if you bring them. So I'm not necessarily criticizing that, although it does feel very much like all of the sentencing that has happened thus far and all of the charges are very much lowballing a serious, very, very serious crime, the most serious crime that you can commit against your country or against your countrymen.
Definitely.
But I will say that I was very proud to hear the urgency and the righteous anger with which Biden's speech defended our democracy today.
Yes.
I think that was sorely needed. I wish he would have said it a whole year ago.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I would have seen that vim and vigor coming from him with regard to the defense of our country, and him just thumbing his nose at the former guy and saying, that guy did the most horrible thing. I know that it's not PC. I know that it's not pretty. because we've never had to do that before, because there was never a president that did something so egregious and so destructive to our country before Trump. So it was just unheard of, unseen for one president to attack a former president, no matter what their politics or disagreements might be.
Mm-hmm.
But this, I think, was very necessary, and I think he pulled it off.
Yep, yeah, we got up early and watched that, and I'm really glad that he really put it down, because you need to right now. And I notice that the media is actually stepping up too. Everyone needs to step up. A year is too long to let this fester, to let this get spun and lied about. We need to take action now, because we have our future to worry about. We're entering into a fourth wave of COVID. We have some really big issues we need to deal with in this country, and the stuff from the past needs to be dealt with, held accountable, and we need to look to the future. And I'm really glad that Biden did what he did. All sorts of criticisms are going to come, but hey, that's what happens when you tell it the way it is.
To me, it seems like some form of manufactured incompetence on the part of white America with regard to this insurrection. I'm just going to say it, because a lot of people are thinking it. If this had been a bunch of Antifa and Black Lives Matter people led by Obama and Pelosi, and they had been called to storm the Capitol and had damaged property and threatened to kill the Vice President of the United States and smeared feces all over the wall, I think the general public and the law enforcement authorities and everyone would be treating this like a 3-alarm fire. They would be acting a lot different.
Definitely, and that's totally true. And I know that would have happened if there would have been more people of color involved. But white America just turns their head and they ignore it. They got the stealth visor on.
It's not like we don't have context for this, Duke. In March of 1954, 10 Puerto Rican separatists stormed the U.S. Capitol.
Wow.
And they were prosecuted for seditious conspiracy. And guess what? They were sentenced from 16 to 75 years in prison.
Oh boy. Yeah, there you go.
We haven't seen so much as a slap on a wrist so far, in my opinion.
Yeah.
When you match up the actions of these terrorists, domestic terrorists, to the ones I just described to you.
And to the law.
What did the separatists in this case do? What differentiated them from the 1-6 domestic terrorists?
They were people of color.
That's right. That's the only real difference that I can see here in the sentencing and in the reaction by the American law enforcement body. Now, as you know, on today's anniversary, there were many planned events in Washington, D.C. There was going to be a lot of different speakers, including, of course, our president, our vice president, Kamala Harris. Nancy Pelosi gave a speech on the House floor. There were events planned all over, including the former president announcing he was going to be holding a press conference about the anniversary of 1-6 at Mar-a-Lago, which he unceremoniously and shockingly announced the day before it would take place, that he had canceled it. That was pretty surprising. And a lot of people were speculating as to why he would cancel that.
Yeah.
Because, he's an attention seeker.
Definitely.
This is not the kind of person that would miss an opportunity to be in front of a camera.
Some said that that's why he canceled, because there weren't going to be enough cameras because of the cameras being on the events in Washington.
He's been banned from Twitter. He's been banned from Facebook. He's been deplatformed from almost all social media. Okay. They still don't remove the Twitter accounts that tweet his press releases, quote unquote. They still don't censure or punish in any way the people that carry water for him and are just basically regurgitating his messages on all these social media platforms that he's effectively been banned from. And in addition to that, he's still going and doing interviews on every right-wing podcast, radio show, television program, etc. He's on OAN, Newsmax, and let's not forget that despite the fact that there's been some lost love between Fox News and Trump since the January 6th insurrection, we have as recently as this month learned that Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity and a whole bunch of other people were not just talking to him on a regular basis on that day of the insurrection, sending desperate text messages to him to get him to call off his mob, but also that they were talking to him in the day running up to the insurrection and before that, and were obviously part of the planning and are now being called in to testify because they're material witnesses to this crime. But I will say that it does leave a big question as to why he would cancel this. One suggestion I have that I don't know if anyone has considered, but I was keeping tabs on, is what many MAGA supporters were trying to turn this day into. Because it wasn't enough for them to simply have a counter narrative on this day. I believe Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are still going to be holding some kind of press conference.
Yeah, supposedly this in the afternoon.
Some kind of response, right? That wasn't enough. I believe that many MAGAs wanted to turn this into a day of rallying behind political prisoners, as they call them, all of the terrorists that have been arrested and that have been incarcerated so far, or even those that have been sentenced, and to demand justice for them and the martyrs who they blame were killed by, a biased Biden administration when he wasn't even in power at the time, like Ashley Babbitt.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the other woman's name that was trampled that same day. They really wanted to turn this into a day of mourning and to further pursue pushing their own whitewashed narrative of the day, that this was merely a peaceful protest of people that were invited there by their president. So much so that one of the terrorists that was interviewed on Newsmax had this to say. His name is Ed Lang. He pleaded with the former president saying, "I am so disappointed in Trump for canceling his January 6th press conference. It just shows how far we have fallen. Where is our rally tomorrow? There should be 100,000 people in D.C. tomorrow at the very minimum. I am so disappointed with Trump and the American people at large that just do not get behind the January 6th political prisoners. President Trump, where are you? You better do a press conference, man. We are rotting in jail because we stood up for what you told us to stand up for."
Yeah, it's pretty damning testimony to really show that Trump is basically the one that really did cause this insurrection. There's lately I've just noticed that the media is really picking up on it because the Select Committee for January 6th is putting out some of the information from the people who have testified. And that has led them to actually have more confidence in reporting that Trump, what he did. We all knew that. We watched what happened a year ago. We all know this went on. But now they actually have people who are firsthand people who saw what was going on. They've given their testimony to the committee. Now the media is actually going out there and reporting on this. But it's a year or two late, but still, it's happening, and that's really putting the pressure where it needs to be.
I think that what you just heard this man say is a testament to the fact that, they're not becoming self-aware. They're not really remorseful about what they did that day. They're expecting to become martyrs. They're expecting to be pardoned. They're expecting to have statues of them. This man goes on in his interview, which I will not share any part of on this program, to say that there's a statue for George Floyd. Where's the statue for Ashley Babbitt, the domestic terrorist?
Wow.
I mean, these are the kinds of disgusting, racist ideologies that have been allowed to continue to grow and to spread among the 1-6 terrorists that are all apparently bundled together at that D.C. jail. So, 1 year ago today, we recently also learned from the testimony of Stephanie Grisham, who was working directly with Melania Trump, that while the Capitol was being attacked, while police officers were being beaten, and as you know, over 140 of them were injured, Trump was in the White House dining room watching everything unfold on television and, quote-unquote, rewinding and watching again, thrilled that they were fighting for him. So, I mean, you and I remember watching what was happening and feeling so weak. I was not feeling well, I remember that. But I was laying in bed and weeping. Like, I felt a mixture of rage and deep sorrow.
It was very traumatic, the things that were happening that day. And also, we were glued to the live streams. We were seeing things that were coming out that the news wasn't even catching up to yet. We were seeing so many things. It was a day that we just couldn't believe what was happening. And then we saw people we knew. We saw all these things that are going on, and it's like, it was just live streams were incredible. Eventually, that stuff did catch up to go on the air, that more people could see what was going on.
And a lot of the people that had been radicalized, a lot of the people that were supporting this, even within the body of media people that I knew, it changed me. When we started this show, and we talked about how we haven't been on air for a while, and, I think that besides the 1-6 insurrection, which I think was kind of the last straw for me, about how I felt about fellow media people, people in my community, people I formerly thought of as friends, and just the complete lack of humanity, the complete lack of empathy, all of that culminating with this big lie and Americans pepper spraying and trying to kill law enforcement at the it was just, it was too much for me.
Oh, yeah.
I think it broke a lot of people inside. I know it did me. If I found it very difficult to come back to doing media work, to talking about this without letting all of that emotion come through.
Yeah.
Because it was so hard. And yet, we have done precious little to bring justice for all of the people that were harmed. One of the people that I saw interview, Officer Michael Fanone, I still can't listen to him talk about that day without breaking into tears, because it was so awful and traumatic. I've seen the video. I saw him tased. I listened to the FBI interviews with Danny Rodriguez, who tased him in the neck several times. I don't know how that man gets up every day. I don't know how he gets up and puts one foot in front of the other and keeps living. I can understand why, especially after 100 members of Congress went back in there after what they saw and still voted not to certify the election results. After those same people refused to meet with these officers and basically gave them the middle finger, the lack of respect. It's not surprising to me that Michael Fanone has resigned or retired from his position and will now be commentating over on CNN. I don't know if this is the first of his appearances on CNN, but I think it's very telling what he had to say about how this has affected officers, law enforcement, especially at the Capitol, because of the lack of response from Congress. Take a listen for yourselves.
With other folks in law enforcement and what you all have been talking about with each other leading up to this day and on this day?
I think a lot of the conversations that I had early on, and many continue to this day, it was important for the officers, myself included, that went to the Capitol to not be viewed as victims. We were American police officers who responded to the Capitol and fought off an insurrection in defense of democracy. I'm incredibly proud of that. And I'm proud of the officers that continue to this day to uphold their oath to the Constitution and defend democracy, specifically my former department, and also the U.S. Capitol Police, who have to do it and walk the same halls as some of these insurrectionist members of Congress. I couldn't imagine sharing a workspace with those jackasses.
You're angry, and it makes sense. It makes sense, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for, the conversation that we've been having all year with you. We really appreciate it. Harry, you as well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us throughout this incredibly momentous year following January 6th.
He couldn't keep talking.
Yeah.
His voice just trailed off. I just can't imagine. Can you imagine the rage, the PTSD that Michael Fanone would have to face after he was murdered, almost murdered, after they tased him and forced him? He had a heart attack.
Yeah.
They nearly killed him. There are so many officers that almost lost their lives or did lose their lives as a result. And then to walk down the hall and see a Ted Cruz, to see a Jim Jordan, to see a Kevin McCarthy, to see a Lindsey Graham, to see these Paul Gosar, for Christ's sake, to see a Mo Brooks, a Lauren Boebert, a Marjorie Taylor Greene, for Christ's sake. Can you imagine a Matt Gaetz just sauntering down the hall, a Josh Hawley raising an arm to the insurrectionists? As you remember how these people cheered on the folks that tried to kill you and end our democracy, end our country, trample the Constitution, and desecrate our capital the way they did a year ago. I wouldn't be able to do it. I would quit my job. I would immediately leave for my mental health.
Yep, and none of the Republicans showed up today to hear the Biden speech or to deal with the January 6th anniversary. They basically all left Washington to kind of show that, I don't know, they don't care.
That is just the epitome, que sin vergüenzas, my grandmother say. No shame. They have no shame. I think it's probably because they have no conscience. Because you would have to have some kind of empathy for what this whole line about back the blue and make sure that you're the party of law and order and that you're enforcing the laws. Where did that go?
That's right. We're a nation made of laws. What happened to that?
Well, let me tell you. Here's one that we should have used that we didn't avail ourselves of on January 6th a year ago, and that's the 25th Amendment, which, as you know, allows you to remove a sitting president if they're unfit, right? If they cannot do their job, if they're incapable of doing their job. And I cannot imagine a more clear and obvious example of that than January 6th, where for 187 minutes people were pleading for the former guy to stop his racist mob from stopping the election, the electoral count to be certified, and he refused. But there is a new wrinkle in that story. Just today, Caitlin Collins reported that Trump, remember that the 1-6 Select Committee asked for all of the takes of that video that he finally put out?
That's right.
Where even as he told them to leave, he told them he loved them and they're very special people.
Yeah.
That's what he said to these terrorists that were trying to kill Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Yeah. Remember also that they were asking for the different takes because they knew that he had to do various takes of the same video because he refused to say that they needed to leave. The important part, the only part that was important was that he had to tell them to stop.
Yeah.
That he had to tell them to leave the Capitol. And he wouldn't do that. Well, the only reason he finally did add it to the video, the only reason that he put the video out with the correct language wasn't because he finally gave in, he finally caved. It was because they threatened to remove him using the 25th Amendment.
Oh, really?
They said, okay, this is the part where you are unfit and people are going to die. People are probably dying right now because of your unfitness. So we're going to remove you. And that is when he was like, fine.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll tell them I love them, but they should go home.
And he also said, quote, that he hated that he had to do it. Even after all of that,
Wow.
and with the prospect of being removed from office hanging over his head, he still reluctantly told them to leave. I mean, if that is not a dereliction of duty, as Liz Cheney said, I do not know what is.
That's right.
And we also learned recently that Pence is cooperating with the committee.
Yeah, I saw that too.
I wonder if they've got him in the witness protection program yet.
Well, he's been pretty out of the picture anyway, so it won't make much of a difference.
Well, I did hear that he was homeless for a while after the 1/6 insurrection. Remember that?
He didn't have a house.
He was staying with friends here, there, there in Yan.
Couch surfing.
Remember, he wouldn't even leave the VP's house because Kamala was like, what?
I don't have anywhere to go and I'm a millionaire.
Right. He was like, he was homeless. He was unhoused for a bit. So I'm a little bit worried about the former VP. I don't suppose that he has a lot of support because the MAGAs don't have any sympathy for his plight.
Yeah.
And finally, and this is going to be coming up in the days to come, and of course, I know that for years, probably for decades, you know how everything is. People probably wondered and did reports on and investigations on how JFK was assassinated, but we haven't really found out. We still keep finding out new things.
Yeah, they declassify things every 40 years, you know.
Right. So I know we're going to keep hearing about this for many, 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 many decades to come. But in the upcoming days, Bob Woodward and Robert Costa will be on CNN and also on The Morning Joe and on The View. They're making the media rounds talking about their book, Peril. And, of course, what they wrote in the book about this insurrection. And one of the things they were doing was trying to go over their notes that they wrote about the day or the days, leading up to it. And Robert Costa tweeted some of what they were planning on discussing, including the fact that on January 5th, he had noted that the city was empty, freezing cold, the trash uncollected, and there were rats everywhere. The Willard Hotel was a hot spot. MAGA clashing with police were there. There was MAGA protesters clashing with the police there at the Willard Hotel. They were rowdy. Back at Willard, there were black cars. Later, they went back and forth on whether to include the detail about the rats being everywhere in the book, and decided against it because it felt extraneous. Personally, I think that they were afraid of the conclusions or the illusions.
Yeah.
People would write.
Definitely the place was full of rats. I know that.
The place is full of rats, metaphorically and also in reality.
Exactly.
And then also they learned later that Giuliani, Trump's lawyers and allies, and Bannon's crew were arriving in those black cars that they had seen. It took them months to fully understand everything that they had seen that night, but eventually they came to understand and even confirmed the scope of the Willard War Room and Trump's connection to it. And looking through those notes, it was worth remembering that the true volatility in the U.S. a year ago, January 5 through 8, a vice president was on the brink, being urged to be the tip of the spear for delaying or blocking the certification of electors. And Giuliani even wanted to go over to the vice president's house that evening on 1/5 to give him a stern talking to. late on 1/5. Pence eventually did have dinner that night at his residence with several supporters and donors of the MAGA movement, but Giuliani doesn't ultimately go over for dinner. Strikingly, and this is not to be forgotten, Trump that evening then issues a late statement saying Pence agrees with him on his position on the election. Something that was not the case.
Yep, it was a lie.
It was a lie that stunned Pence and his advisors.
Yep.
But it was also laying the groundwork for what they were going to do the next day. So you know that the war room discussions that evening with Bannon and Giuliani and everything that was done that night are going to become very important details of what we're going to be learning about the insurrection on January 6th. And it is a historic day that shall never be forgotten. I know a lot of people want to whitewash it and change it or
minimize it, ignore it.
But I will never let that happen because of how deeply it affected me. It also gave me a much deeper appreciation for my country, for our Constitution, for the fragility of our democracy, and it made me care a lot more about defending those things.
You're a true patriot then.
Yes, thank you. I really have become much more urgently patriotic since the January 6th insurrection.
Because you care about democracy.
Because I want to continue to live in a free nation, and we are quickly falling into authoritarianism and fascism, and it scares the bejeebus out of me. That's the truth. But you know what else is really scary? Our response to Omicron, our response to COVID, period. But also, I don't know if people are just desensitized completely. They just don't give a crap anymore, or they've just thrown their hands up and they're like, whatever. What do you?
They have. I can see it in the behavior. I'm actually not going to set foot out of this house, except to go in the yard and just make sure the vehicles run. But I'm not going any place for weeks now. Probably not till February, March, because it is too dangerous out there. This is spreading so fast because of people's behavior. If you go into Fargo, North Dakota, which is one of the hotbeds in our community and our county here, Clay County and Moorhead, the numbers are skyrocketing, and no one wears masks. No one pays attention to this at all. And our hospitals are full, and it's getting worse. And people just aren't taking precautions. Businesses aren't. They want to keep on working or forcing people to work. Unemployment has ended. The housing moratorium has ended in many places. People are getting poorer and poorer, and there's no alternative than to expose yourself to COVID. So I'm not going to do it. I'm going to, we will have to live more lean. We've got to do some things to take care of ourselves. We can't visit family, which we have not been able to do for 2 years. We have to stick to this so someday we can actually do some things that are going to be beneficial for us.
Yeah. It's very sad. And to the point that you were making about you know, where we should be. Isn't it a little bit sad that last year, because we were under a Republican president, we were actually able to get some assistance to
Yeah.
people? But now that we have a Democratic president, because the Republicans are so hell-bent on making Biden look bad, they're not willing to send out the support that we so desperately need. They're willing to let people literally die.
Yep, exactly.
And, I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, it really makes me angry because stimulus payments help keep people at home. I mean, Canada has done it for a long time, and they've had their outbreaks go down, their numbers drop. They've been really cautious with the border issues, and here they're having some discussion about stimulus again. But you know, this Congress is not going to let that sort of thing pass. They'd rather have another million people die before they would leverage any funding to help people eat, pay their rent, and pay their bills.
Well, there was a very interesting Twitter thread by Cerise, which is at TrueGem1312. True, spelled T-R-U. I thought it was an interesting little theory. They said, let's be real. They don't want to do another lockdown, no matter how many people are sick or dying, because they saw what happens when people have time and energy from not working 40-plus hours a week and being exhausted and burnt out constantly. They fight back. Lockdowns, the last lockdown, we ended up having protests in every state. And if we have lockdowns and people aren't getting sick as much and not going to work as much, we might be in the streets again. And they're scared of us. And that we might be even more angry this time. And I just want to add that I'm super aware that they also will not lock down because of capitalism.
Yep.
And caring more about profits and the economy than human lives. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about that already. This is just a factor I haven't seen brought up yet. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, definitely, that's true. You know, it's all about capitalism. You know, that keeping in fact, one of the discussions about stimulus is that, but the economy is doing good. So why should we actually, you know, give relief to people and businesses if the economy is doing good? Because that's what they care about. You know, we're talking about a bunch of millionaires and billionaires who run this country.
We're very fortunate that we can work from home and that we can, you know, make a decision that we're not going to go anywhere and we're not going to take the risks. But there's a lot of folks that have to go to work. Like Dave Christopher at MLS_Dave, he tweeted, I've been religiously wearing my N95 mask since Thanksgiving. I've gone nowhere but work, the store, and home. I still contracted Omicron. And my wife and I are both sick.
Wow.
Sicker than heck. 5 days in a row, but unmasked or cloth masked kids in packed schools won't be a mass Omicron spreading nightmare?
Yeah,
Come on.
exactly.
And here we have so many schools willy-nilly without proper testing, without proper ventilation. They're just going to reopen at the height of this pandemic, at the height of this Omicron wave. One teacher responded, I left my profession as a teacher and I pulled my kids from school. That's how serious I think this is. We are not effing sacrificial lambs. Teachers love their students, but there's no one to protect us.
Yep.
I'm not willing to die for it and orphan my only child. That's how I feel.
Wow.
What do you think?
Well,
I mean, it's a hard thing. There's a lot of parents out there that really depend on the schools for childcare.
Yeah, and also the teachers' unions are saying, you know, you're putting the teachers in danger by requiring them to go teach classes. They're having teachers do other classes on top of the classes they're doing. They're putting
They're
teachers
having
in
bus
danger.
drivers teach classes
That's
now,
right.
too.
That's right. The janitors and bus drivers and the lawn keepers are now the professors at the school. Also, the healthcare workers, similar situation. They're forcing them to go back to work even though they've been exposed to COVID. They're making them work with COVID. Just put a mask on. You know, we cannot have an injury. Be careful. You can't have an injury. You can't get sick. You cannot get medical attention right now because the hospitals are the hotbed petri dishes of COVID.
Yeah, and if you have a heart attack or car accident or what have you, you're also going to probably get COVID.
That's right.
If you have to go to the hospital. So Stay safe out there, folks. Try to keep yourself indoors and away from this Omicron and also the new French variant that's out now, which is starting to spread. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, this one is called UHF or something like that.
UHF. UFO. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they ran out of Greek letters or what, but
That's too bad.
that's what's happening in the world right now.
Wow.
We will be back on a Mexican Crossing Lines to bring you the reports of daily news and what's going on, not just in our local community, but worldwide. Thank you for listening today as we remember the insurrection of January 6th a year ago on 88.1 FM KPPP LP Fargo Moorhead, where we are adding local color to your airwaves. This has been Cindy Gomez-Schempp
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
Thank you very much and have a great evening.